Hello and welcome again to RP-0 America. Didn't get any more career progress in the last week, but I did test out a number of things. One of those is this beautiful craft which was constructed by Schnobs. So I plan to use basically where I'm drawing here and up, and then combine it with a FASA Saturn V. But I'm going to show off the whole craft because I mean he constructed it. It's worth it's also worth using as is. I just like to use the FASA parts. So this is a Gemini-Direct. Ignore that name there. It's just from removing some parts and things. So it is just a Gemini. Starting up here, it's a Gemini capsule, and it has a module here which is for returning. If you kind of engineer it backwards, so the last thing it has to do is return from the lunar surface and return to Earth. And it has a service module with life supporty stuff buried in there as well. You can see some fuel cells, ladders, etc. And then he uses Schnobs makes really nice tank structures, as you can see here. These pill-shaped and sphere-shaped tanks for these various bits. And then this engine is used for the kind of crasher stage, for bringing the overall payload into lunar orbit and then bringing it down towards a lunar descent, and then this other part will complete the lunar descent. And then below that it's kind of Schnobs' interpretation version of a Saturn V. So I'll give me a week or so, but I'll post up links to all the kind of related concepts. If Schnobs is okay with me posting a link to this craft, don't ask him or me really for help. He's got instructions. There's house rules. If you notice this very thin procedural base here, so Schnobs has some custom rules which will allow those to be created and to occur, so to allow a craft like this to exist. So you could notice all these thin bases which create the the fairing covers for the various elements, and they require a thin and small base to do that. This craft will require that. He also uses remote tech, which I don't, so his craft that I took first had a remote tech antenna on it that I removed, but beyond that it's FASA parts up here and procedural parts down. So this is his version of a Saturn S4B, the third stage of a Saturn V, and the ullage engines, and avionics ring to go with. Second stage of the Saturn V, again ullaging engines and J2s. And then the first stage of a Saturn V. So I just wanted to show off all the parts in VAB before I used it, because this isn't the only thing I had a chance to look at last week. I also was trying to kind of update my graphic settings, because everything could be prettier, and I wanted to see what I could do. Use RVE or RSSVE. Again, give me a week to put links to all of this in the file for this. So let's see, in the description for this. So I've got an instance of that craft I just showed off already on the pad, ready to go. And I think the pad is in kind of a semi-destroyed state, because it's a big launcher. I'm not sure why it let me construct and launch a craft from a semi-destroyed launch pad, but hey, it doesn't matter to me. This is just in a sandbox state. So I intend to use a craft like this to land on the moon effectively, to go with Gemini-Direct as was suggested or requested by a number of people, and I'm okay with doing that. And Schnobs, thanks again, made a craft so I could do it in style. I can actually look nice to do Gemini-Direct with a Saturn V. Of course, in my career, I don't have really any of the parts for it that are required for it installed, or unlocked. So it'll be a while till I can actually launch it, but I just wanted to kind of test it out myself, proof it, and it works fine, works very nicely. I even did some kind of test elements of later elements of a mission. But anyway, I also was working on graphical things. So that's why I have this time control mod installed, so I can kind of get a reading of FPS. You can see 11 there, and it's also coming out of, I think this is the Sarbian graphic memory readout, but I could be wrong, but I think that's where that comes from. Just close, there might be a chunk here as I close my browser and all the tabs to reclaim the memory I need to do what I'm doing here. So it's really, with the graphics mods, at least for me at the moment, it is quite a balance between beauty and frame rate. And so this is already a bit of a compromise, obviously. The frame rate is pretty low. I also turned off the nice fancy ocean from Scatterer, but you know, man, look at the light effects and everything. I also have a number of new cloud layers. RSSVE, which I will link to at some point, has a GitHub, and I use that. And I modified it to enable a mid and high cloud layer, so Earth has many cloud layers. So what I think I'm going to do, soon we're going to pass through this layer, and as you can see, the frame rate, which was already low, starts to drop pretty brutally as we enter. Let's go pitch down a little bit. Frame rate starts to drop as we approach this cloud layer of volumetric clouds. So I think I'm going to disable that. I think that's the compromise I'm going to make. I think it's roughly a trade-off of frame rate to disable volumetric clouds and to enable the pretty water the scatterer reflects nice light from the sun. So I think I'm going to make that switch. But you know, of course, this is how I had things, so I was going, you know, I'm going to record it this way anyway. People let me know what you think. But pretty much everything that I have here, other than like the couple enabled cloud layers that you'll see shortly, are just part of RSSVE, which was, I believe, Phineas Freak started it. Thanks very much to him. Just kind of an evolution of the kind of RVE config for Eve and lots of, you know, other 3-letter acronym jargon. But effectively, there's a graphics suite for RSS, and we always rely on Pinko Pete to do all the hard work and post it for us. And you know, we're kind of having this route where we're going to, since we always have feedback and say, hey, Pingo, have you tried this, etc. And sometimes Pingo will take that, those suggestions or not, and so basically having RSSVE instead of is something that the Realism Overhaul people can contribute to. If we find an improvement or want to suggest an improvement, we can just kind of manage those configs ourselves. So as you can see, the frame rate is just brute magoot here in the volumetric cloud layer. So I personally do like the volumetric cloud layer quite a bit. It's so much of a hit on my frame rate that I am just going to dump it. So I'm just going to turn on some time warp here as I go through. Yeah, I don't know, I really like kind of the haze, the kind of natural many-layered fog which is produced by the volumetric cloud as you pass through it. But ultimately, I just don't think it's worth the frame rate hit that I take. As you can see, it gets really brutal. And I wish I'd installed this mod, of course, for Sarbian's memory watcher and frame rate watcher and the time control one here. Before applying all these graphical changes that I did, I think I updated Scatterer, try other config for it. I think there might have been the config in RSSVE, but I could be wrong, which I'm using. Oof, it really should have pitched down a lot more at this point. But my feel for things has changed because the frame rate, the speed at which time is passing really changes my feel for things. But as you can see, there's multiple cloud layers at different altitudes. These volumetric clouds are always kind of poofier and brighter than they probably should be. And I'm also, this is, as just a graphical test, this is not a realistic trajectory you'd ever take a Saturn V on, but I'm heading kind of straight north. I'm going to put it into a polar orbit so I can, kind of look at everything in nice shiny fashion. The sun flare, as you can see there, I think it looks pretty good. The sun flare and the size of things. So I think I'm going to leave it that way. As this is. I don't think I made any modifications to it. I know I've kind of fidgeted and twitched. I tried a couple of different modifications to it, but I think I just kind of went back to what that has. But there's everything in the graphical settings, everything in Scatterer, everything in Eve RVE can be tweaked, and that takes a lot of time. But it's really just config tweaking and observation. Which I personally enjoy doing, but at the same time, other people could do it as well if they like. You could feel free to kind of take the config that's on RSSVE, on that GitHub, install it, take a look at it, and it should look pretty similar to what I end up with here. And then go into the config menus for Scatterer and for RVE, or Eve RVE. So first stage burnout, olaging of the second stage. So I think this is a cool thing that he did. That Schnobs did in this design. Oh yeah, I arced ridiculously. Need to pitch way down. So take a look at this. So there were solid engines in this skirt here, but between the first and second stage, and they're actually on the segments there, which I think is pretty cool. And I'm pretty sure those are attached to this thin ring here, which requires Schnobs house rules. That's not quite the way it's done historically. That's not quite the way it is set up in the FASA Saturn V, but it still looks really cool and similar enough for me for use here. Oh yeah, I'm going to lob really hard, but the payload on this is so light that a Saturn V doesn't have much trouble lobbing it even into a polar orbit when it's ham-handedly controlled like I'm doing here. So you can see I've already have a few frames back from before, and I'm just going to kind of pan around so you can see how nice all the cloud layers look. So that's out towards the sun. The clouds are kind of pink and white. They're well lit by the sun, and in the opposite direction it's a bit darker. At the horizon it's more hazy. The clouds are a bit darker, and of course there's all the cities scattered. I think the cities look a little brash, like they're a little they're poking out pretty hard, but I'm not sure if there's a way to maybe that can be toned down a little bit so they don't just 100% overlay the terrain, or the atmosphere, as you can see, also makes them look a little more blended in as you go. But there are so many tweaks that can be done, graphics wise. So frame rate not too bad now, not terrible. Could obviously be better. So I'm just going to quickly place this into orbit, because what I want to show off is kind of how the clouds evolve as we go over the Earth. So I've got 3 minutes of burn time there, so let me just zoom out. So look how cloudy the Earth is. So I have 3 layers of clouds turned on right now. I pretty much just copied the config for the low cloud, and again, give me a week, at some point I might post that config, but let me show you how they look in here. So I took Earth Cloud Low, so this is the config that's already in RVE, and also possibly somewhat a little differently configured in RSSVE. But you can see the altitude, and in here, obviously you wouldn't type it in here, it's actually in the config, but Earth Cloud's low, and the detail alto stratus, and the various config for it. So I'll just end up disabling the, where's the 3D layer volume? There we go. I'll end up disabling that. So that's the low layer. So I also just created a mid and a high. I just copied that and I just used that name style, low, mid, high, to make use of the textures, because RSSVE come packaged with Earth Clouds mid and an Earth Clouds, see, you can see I used the main text. There isn't a main text for Earth Cloud high, so I just reused mid for both of them, but there are 2 different details. So mid has cirrus, high has cumulus. Yeah, I'll have to take a look, see which one of those looks better. I might keep all 3 of these layers, or I might not. But that's really the big change I made to things, was to enable those additional cloud layers just as copy and paste of the low one, just using the textures that come for high that make sense, those 2 different detail texts. Okay, and I just showed it. They'll be in configs that hopefully I'll be able to link to soon, but they look really nice. Like, that's actually kind of looks like the sun is producing interesting effects on those cloud layers. So like I said, you would never fly like this, because we're flying over the continental US. So hundreds of tons of rocket would come crashing down on possibly populated areas. So this risk would not be taken. All right, let's just point that and finish this stage off. And you can see the Great Lakes. I live somewhere in that region in Canada. I'm gonna guess, maybe that's New York. I'm really not sure. Doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter. And I think there is a layer that's used for laying down the cities, because I noticed as we go very far north in Canada, it doesn't lay out city material. But that would be Detroit and Sarnia, the Greater Toronto area. Who's it's called? Buffalo and Niagara there. Chicago, Minneapolis. No, Minneapolis out there. Milwaukee is there. Oh, there we go. The stage is already burned out. I didn't even notice. Yeah, usually there's good reasons not to fly this way, but it is really neat to see territories that you'd recognize as a map. And so as you can see, Schnobs use the same kind of staging technique there, which I think looks really cool, even if it's not exactly the way it was done on a Saturn V. It doesn't need to be. If it functions and looks cool, why not do it? And then we're moving, so now we're kind of over, what is this, Ohio under here maybe? And so you can see the Greater Toronto Area, it's actually built up, and then the Quebec, the capital, Ottawa of Canada area up there. And as you go further north in Canada, there really isn't city, and there's even less really built up territory than it shows. I don't think you'd be able to see much up here from space anyway. And so we're approaching the North Pole. So that, it's a neat thing about flying a polar orbit is that we won't have the same kind of sunrise-sunset pattern that we're used to having. We're actually heading downhill right now. Okay, so I kind of want to, I do want to circularize my orbit to some extent. So I'll pitch up a bit. It's always good practice to keep your vertical speed near 0 when you're achieving orbit. Yeah, I don't know, maybe that's the biggest splotch of territory. Maybe that's New York. I don't know. I just know the kind of central and western Canadian parts of this eastern coast. Alright, pitching down, just kind of pushing vertical speed towards 0. Oh, it looks like we're achieving orbit. Ooh, very wobbly. That's okay. And we have achieved a decent orbit. That's good enough. So now I can just start to show off features. So I really like the triple cloud layer, the low, medium, high. I need to experiment with them. That's part of what kept me from posting a career video last week. There's just so much tweaking and observation you can do. I recorded a little bit of it for myself just so I can could take observations of things as they change. What changes between using different settings, because you might not notice them all in one go. Have I changed? No, I prefer to go camera free, even though I did notice recently that when you pass over the poles, the free camera kind of does some crazy stuff. So let's look south one last time so you can still see the Great Lakes. Can't really see Florida. Can't see Florida anymore. See way out to the easternmost bits of Canada. And the sun and sun flare look really nice there. And let's pan around towards the south, out towards western Canada, and I think the scatter profile looks pretty good. The way the horizon blends. Oh, I also replaced the skybox, or whatever the other names for it are, but. It looks pretty good to me. I don't know. The clouds the stars are very colored. There's, and I think the texture kind of doesn't work perfectly for my screen. It's just a 1080 screen, but I think the texture is so big in such a weird way that something's causing the stars to twinkle. Which my understanding is stars shouldn't appear to twinkle from space. So, other than that, I really don't have any complaints. I might experiment with the old skybox and check how much RAM is used and the frame rate impact. As you can see, the frame rate from space now with engines and everything off is pretty decent, or at least decent as far as my frame rates tend to go. So there's another thing to see up here. See, I don't know, the clouds look really good when you've got these 3 layers. So from out here, you can clearly see that this RSSVE has aurora, which is neat, and it's kind of configured as a cloud layer. With this polar orbit I have, I don't really see the sky, in the dark, but I would expect the aurora to appear more obvious and bright over the night part of the sky, but that may not be possible the way it's configured. The fact that we can kind of have aurora configured as clouds is neat in and of itself. So it may not be particularly obvious. I was kind of just fiddling with the settings, and this kind of vague a little bit of green might be all we see this pass of the aurora, but I did find that it was substantially more brilliant over the South Pole, which may have just been, so as you can see the camera's kind of rotating, that's not me doing it, it's because we're passing over the pole or very close to the pole. So I'll just warp. And I'm trying to make it so that, you know, you get good long static shots of views, because I'm aware that YouTube will, you know, any video compression will lower the detail rate, the detail of video if there's a lot of changes. And if there aren't many changes frame to frame, you get to see closer to what I see. So that's why I'll just like move to a spot, and then after a few seconds, you know, the compression should settle it and make it look a bit more like what I have, rather than, you know, artifacts of compression. So we're over Russia. I don't know any of the territory here, but see, the sun doesn't quite set because we have a polar orbit, which is pretty neat. If we look over to the dark side, it is just dark. Nothing more to say there. And I do have this off right now, by the way. Yeah, and the sun is kind of shining on the water there, and the horizon changes appearance. And pretty soon I'd expect we'll be approaching the poles. So you look at those pretty cloud layers. Here, let me pause on it for just a bit, so that YouTube will, you know, the compression will catch up and you'll get to see something similar to what I see. And now where am I with respect to there? All right, so I am approaching the South Pole, and if we don't see really brilliant aurora, then I will have to kind of revisit all my tweaks. So there we, so okay, we aren't. That's pretty good. That's pretty similar to what I saw. So you can very clearly see aurora. We're viewing aurora from above there, so it's just a tinge of green. But where it's near the horizon, you can very clearly see it. And that's how the aurora are. They're kind of a layer of atmosphere that's being energized, you know, with energetic cosmic ray particles. You know, complicated phenomena, but, you know, TLDR, it's a layer that's much higher than cloud layers, so like 70, 80, you know, something like that, kilometers up, and so you see it as a distinct layer from the ground or the clouds, and so that's where it seems to be easiest to see with the, you know, with it modded in, which is neat. So you can see some over there, and there's multiple layers of them. I don't know if they can evolve, like I don't know if they can change with time like real aurora do. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, a pretty decent range of people from pretty different geographical regions watch these videos, I imagine, and so some people may have never seen the aurora borealis or the Australia borealis, which I imagine this would be around the, because it's around the South Pole, but they do shimmer and change over periods of, you know, of minutes. So it's this kind of slow, gradual waving. And this is one of the few places as well that I can really clearly see the cloud shadow, and I feel that's really what makes clouds look real. So I'm not sure if that's cloud shadow or terrain shadow there, but I'm pretty sure, you know, these are obviously clouds, and you can see, very clearly see, you know, cloud pattern, shadow of cloud. So I will have, that's what I'm trying to figure out. That's one of the things that I really want to get out of RVE is, and, you know, RSSVE, you know, say tomato, out of config modifications. If anybody can figure out how to make all the cloud layers make nice, pretty shadow layers, that really looks much more realistic to me. Oh yeah, that's clearly terrain, and terrain shadowing over there. But this stuff is cloud shadows, and it, you know, part of it might just have to be with the angle of the sun. Right now it's at a pretty substantial angle. It might be a difference between shining on ground and shining on water, etc., etc., etc. Right? I do really like to do experimentation like this, but it obviously doesn't work well for a series, and so, you know, that is why when I do fiddling with experiments like this, I say, hey, anybody could do config editing like this as well, and that's why I didn't have a career video, because I was fiddling with these pretty graphical settings. But yeah, you can see the aurora borealis on the aurora australis. I'm not sure. I've never tried to pronounce that out loud, but I know that it's named differently around the South Pole. And I've got 3 pretty cloud layers here. Scatter is all configured up nice. So yeah, over the next week, I'll make sure that I can post links to, you know, to Schnobs Craft here, to the RSSVE GitHub, which you know, would be pretty easy for you to look up, but, you know, I'll link anyway. And I will maybe pull a request to RSSVE where I just add the 2 cloud layers. It may make a hit on the frame rate, and that might be why Phineas Freak didn't add them, or maybe he just didn't realize it was so easy. There we go, to just boom enable cloud layers. Like, they're by no means perfect. Here, actually, let me, ooh, interesting. I just noticed when I zoomed in here, See, you can see that there, and as I zoom out, it kind of fades. So, and that should survive YouTube compression, etc. But that fades. So that might be why it isn't showing shadows. Maybe it's something about altitude. But I'm going to kill the cloud layers here, so you can actually see what goes on. So the actual layers that are in RSSVE right now are the auroras and Earth clouds low. So let me kill Earth clouds high. So just minus, we'll make it go away, and apply. It'll take a second to chunk here, but it will. There we go. So it turned off one of the layers of clouds. That's one that I just kind of enabled by copy and pasting the low clouds. Now the aurora is really brilliant here. Yeah, that should be mostly just apparent when you're viewing the dark side of the sky, because it's this kind of gentle, glowing, ionized gas that probably wouldn't be very brilliant compared to the sun at all. But I mean, we can do whatever we want with graphics prettification mods in KSP. Sure, why not have them really visible during the day? But it would be more ideal if they were much more visible in the dark side of the world. So the world it may not appear that way to you right now, but this is much less cloudy than it was before because I removed one full layer. So I'll just do a quick pan here so you can see more cloud layers. And I think here we go, this is Mexico or Texas. Texaco. Out down towards South America. So now let me kill another cloud layer, and then you can see what the cloud layers minus. So you can add and modify cloud layers from this in-game, but I always just do it through a config. There we go. And so this is just the one low cloud layer remaining that was part of the RSSVE. So you can see quite a bit of clouds went away, but at the same time there are still pretty substantial. There is a pretty substantial layer of clouds still. And that's what you'd maybe be more accustomed to seeing in RSS or from RVE or RSSVE if you've seen that before. But as you can see, Earth is much less cloudy with just the one layer, which may be a good or a bad thing to you depending on whether you like clouds or not from your graphical beautification mods. But yeah, that's it for RVE America this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It's definitely different from the regular video. I just felt kind of owed an explanation of why I didn't have any regular career videos in the last little bit, and just show off what I decided to spend time on instead. All this graphics beautification, and I hope to have some links up for you guys soon. And if I don't in a week, start poking me in the comments. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.